This topic is obviously touching a lot of people. For some people, it's sensitive. For some people, it's insightful. Whether it's insensitive or insightful, it's a reality that we have to address, that we need to address. And because you may be offended by the mere idea of talking about it, doesn't make it irrelevant. It doesn't make it real for a lot of people. It's nothing to be offended about. You can always change the channel. No disrespect. I want to give a quick shout out though to folks that responded and submitted some questions via the email. You can always email me at letschewthegum@gmail.com. So I'll give a shout out to some listeners in Ireland, Mexico, United Kingdom, El Salvador, Germany, Canada, Argentina, Japan, France, Puerto Rico, Belgium, Switzerland, Singapore, Trinidad and Tobago, Cameroon, Russia, and the Czech Republic. Thank you for your questions. I'm going to address some of those on the show today. Welcome to Let's Chew the Gum, Season 2, Episode 2. Welcome to Let's Chew the Gum. I'm your host, Protocol. We talk a lot about a lot of things in this show while we chew the gum, and just like every show, we always have
something for your mind, something for your mind, something for your mind.
정신을 집어넣으세요. 어떤 것 필요합니까?
Something for your
정신을 집어넣으세요.
mind.
정신을 집어넣으세요.
Something for your
Let's get right into it. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z while we chew the gum. Always feel free to email into the show at letschewthegum@gmail.com if you have questions, comments, show topics, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show. You are obviously listening to this podcast, but just want to let you know that you can find this podcast on multiple platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, quite a few other ones. I want to get right into this show to address some of the concerns or some of the questions that listeners from around the world have asked. In the intro, I mentioned those countries, and I want to make sure that we understand that also includes the United States. We have some questions from some listeners in the U.S. So what I did, I reviewed the questions and sort of compiled them into, a lot of them had overlapped. So let's just start there. So the first question comes from DL in Trinidad and Tobago. And the question is, what do you mean there was no need for white supremacy during slavery? Wasn't that white supremacy? DL, you are absolutely correct. And what I was suggesting was that there was no need for racism during slavery within those slave areas. Obviously, in other areas outside of the slave holding states and areas. And what I meant by that is when you are in control, or when those slaveholders were in control, that was it. The law was in their favor. Society's norms were in their favor. So there was no need to have racism. Racism is a component of a power structure. Ideas and policies are enacted based upon race in order to keep a particular group in power, or to provide certain advantages to that particular group. Well, slavery was instituted. So that's what I was attempting to address there. I definitely I appreciate that question to allow me to clarify. White supremacy we can trace back to colonialism, I suppose. During the Industrial Revolution, when European powers were able to amass large amounts of military force, which was based upon resources that they oftentimes had to go into other areas to acquire, such as Africa and Southeast Asia. Many of those resources were depleted in Europe. And, once they were able to create some advanced weapons, that allowed them to oftentimes subdue their opponents. And many times, let's not mistake this. Oftentimes, it's just like today, political arrangements. It wasn't that Europeans were so powerful that they could just go in and overpower African communities, for example. They were well fortified and advanced militarily themselves, but a lot of infighting between different communities and agreements between African leaders and European powers obviously led to slavery. But this idea that Europeans were a supreme being, I would suggest, has its foundations in that time frame. And mostly it's an ideology. It was never true. But, when you control the press and the media and you're able to put that information out there and reinforce it over and over, for some people it becomes a pseudo reality. Excuse me. Let me go on to the next question. It says, this is from AB in Puerto Rico. What's up, AB? It says, if white doesn't exist, then why do people identify as white, black, etc.? And that's in reference to a statement from the last episode where I said that the idea of white is a social construct. It doesn't exist. People didn't identify themselves as white people. And we're speaking, I was speaking from the perspective of U.S. history. But I venture to say worldwide, people didn't consider themselves white. They considered themselves from whatever nation they originated from. They were Dutch or German or British, et cetera, et cetera. Later on, even American. But this idea of whiteness, racial categories in general, were things that were created to stratify society. And I made the suggestion, or pointed out, I should say, last week that the idea of white became synonymous with political power, with property, with advantages that were given to a particular group of people. And unfortunately, over time, people have bought into that. So why do we still have white supremacy? I mean, when you think about it, does that even make sense? If you are a white supremacist, does I'm getting my tongue tied here. Does that make sense that because of a particular color that you are superior, or a certain hue or skin tone that you are superior to someone else? It doesn't make sense, but people are losing their minds over this, because as it comes to an end and as it's gotten rid of, as it should be, people are scrambling to figure out where they stand, for most of their lives and the lives of their recent ancestors. It's been something that they've been able to take advantage of, most often illegally. I mean, just because laws were made, we have Jim Crow laws and these types of laws that supported white supremacy. Those were unjust laws, and that time is really past. Make it on your merit. A lot of folks I have discussed this with, oftentimes talked about as minorities. What were considered minorities. There's another misnomer, but they've talked about or address minorities to say, make it on your own merit, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, hard work, dedication, etc., etc. Well, the same applies. The same applies to those that would identify as white supremacists and those that are engaging in terrorist acts because they are fearing the loss of political and economic advantages that were given to them or provided or allotted to them with really no merit at all. I'm going to go on to this next question. This question is from from history teacher. That's the way they phrase it. History teacher in Maryland. The question is, why would the government want to keep people divided? Well, first of all, let me say that we are the government. I always cringe a little bit when I hear people say the government doesn't, the government won't. We are the government. The problem is that we've given up so much power to the government, a little bit of unearned reverence for government officials. The fact of the matter is, and this is one area where I can agree with many folks that stormed the Capitol. I don't agree with this idea at all. Don't get it wrong. But the idea that many folks were saying they work for us. That's true. The government works for us. We hired them. In our representative democracy, in our republic, the way it works is they represent us, which means they're there to do our work. And when they don't do our work, it's our job to get them out. And in this country, we do that through the process of voting, right? We don't do it through the process of overthrow, although that's a part of government. When you see people rioting, it's just like any other situation you'd call a riot, whether it was in Detroit or in Watts or Newark or anywhere else you've seen riots. I don't immediately pass judgment on the rioters. I'm looking at the government because that's an indication that the government was not responsive to the needs of the people, right? And in the case of, now there's some distinctions, and someone can call in or email and help me to clarify this. The distinction that I see, riots that were based in Watts, LA, Detroit, if you want to call those riots, those were situations where people were not listened to by their government. For years and years, they struggled under the oppression of racism, discrimination, and inequities. And, people sought to, have some redress for those grievances constitutionally. And they went ignored. And I always liken riots to a baby. When a baby wants something and you're not giving the baby what it needs, the baby doesn't have the words or the ability to express itself, so it cries or maybe even throws a tantrum. And a riot is much like a cry out or a tantrum. These are populations that have been made to feel helpless and haven't been able to, again, have a resolution to their problems. The government didn't respond. In the case of the Capitol, I don't know if that can go in the same category. I don't know if there was a government that wasn't responsive to the people, or do they say it wasn't responsive because they believed the election was fraudulent? I don't know, but why would a government want to keep people divided? I wouldn't say it's the government. Again, we're the government, but there are individuals. For those that didn't catch episode 1, this question comes from a statement I made where, in the past, blacks, whites, and Native Americans, if you want to call it brown people, red people, you self-identify. I never want to label anyone, but the fact of the matter is that all those groups were enslaved and they worked together. But there was always a gentry, a landed class, a property class of folks, an elite class, so to speak, that was behind that type of situation. And they had a vested interest in keeping people divided, because if those poor and enslaved black, white, and brown people would have continue to amass tight relationships, that's a power structure. So it was advantageous for those folks to divide them. And it just so happens that a lot of those folks who were the elites were the folks that were running the government and that continue to run the government. I mean, when you think about it, if you have a position you want to protect in a society of supposed laws, the best way to do that is to be the lawmaker, right? So if I am a person with a vested interest to keep particular powers, and I'm in government, I do have an interest in dividing the people. But again, that's not every person in the government, right? Those are individuals. So if I can divide you and keep you fighting amongst yourselves, I can effectively maintain what it is I have that I feel that you may have. I may, they, I don't want to put myself, but they may feel they have a right to those particular powers and advantages. But if they can keep you divided, keep us divided, and we're fighting each other over race, over color of skin, we never have enough time to focus on eliminating the oppressive structure that's keeping us in that situation. We're looking at colors and again blaming each other because of the color of skin, and we're fighting because of the color of skin, and again that keeps us completely unfocused, completely politically divided. The counter to that is to, clean out your ears and open your eyes and see what's happening, whether you're black, white, brown, or whatever, and understand that we all are wanting and needing resources. I said before, good neighborhoods, good schools, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone wants that for themselves and their family. But if I can convince you that you don't have it because of the person with a different skin color, well, now your eyes are off the prize. Now you are fighting amongst yourselves, and you never have enough political sway or political power or influence to make the person oppressing you feel threatened enough to make a change. So don't be duped. Okay. I'm going to take one more question and then take a quick break. Let's see. The next question comes from, where is this from? This question is from the Czech Republic. The Czech Republic. Hans. Is that Hans? All right. How do people in power benefit from people staying focused on race? Oh, okay. Well, I think I was just addressing that when I was addressing the previous question. How do people in power benefit by people staying focused on race? Because it's a distraction. Again, it's a distraction. It's like the oldest trick of the book. While you're looking at my left hand, I'm doing something else with my right hand. Your eyes are off the target. And those aren't your enemies. You can make enemies out of anybody. I mean, don't you haven't you guys seen movies and read books where you maybe read The Art of War or know something about that? Divide and conquer. I mean, that's one of the oldest adages that I'm aware of. Let's create enemies so that amongst yourselves. It's so simple. I just don't understand how people cannot reform their thinking and overcome these issues of racism. Now, I can dislike a person, and I can dislike a person of an opposite race, but I don't dislike you just because you're an opposite race. Don't get me wrong. I'm not here with some kumbaya and naive ideology and being idealistic and altruistic in this approach to say that people will always get along. But it doesn't have to be because of race. There's some people within my own race that I don't trust and I don't necessarily like, and that would never be, I don't want to say never, but it's unlikely that they would, be in my home or invited to my home, and they're in my own race. It has nothing to do with race. There's some people of other races that would, I definitely associate with and would be in my home, and I'm happy to call them brothers and sisters, and they're not in my race. So overcome yourselves, man. You know, renew your thinking, because you'll perish. You'll perish. Believe me. All right. I'm going to take a quick break, and then I'm going to come back and address some more of these questions and see where we go from here. You're listening to Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z. We'll be right back.
Mind. Something for your mind. Mind.
Please mind gap.
Something